When the call comes in, leadership is everything.
We analyze the data in real time,
making the tough decisions under pressure. Welcome to Stat Leadership.
Hello, Leaders Code podcast listeners. Welcome to, I guess we would call this season 2 of our podcast, Leaders Code. I'm Phil Moy from St. Louis.
You know we're not Leaders Code, right? We're Stat Leadership. Sorry, man.
Fuck. All right, we'll start it over again.
No, hey, keep it. Whatever.
Redo. Do you want to bring us in, JR? Or go ahead, bring us in.
Hey, welcome, everybody. It's the Stat Leadership Podcast. We're into season 2 now. Hopefully, by this point, you've gotten hooked on the previous 10 episodes that we released. So we're going to start releasing these on a more regular basis, on a probably monthly basis or so. But now that we got you hooked, we're going to keep feeding you. And so we got some good stuff in mind for this year. We're going to be obviously talking about some more advanced leadership concepts and also bringing some guests in, some leaders that we've learned from and been mentored by. And I think that we're going to have a whole potpourri of stuff. So whatever leadership position you're in, whether you are the CEO, the top dog, the chief medical officer, the department director, or you are earlier in your career and you're looking to move up that ladder, or you're a line leader that has a few folks that they're responsible for, we hope that something is going to speak to you from each of these episodes that we're going to be recording here. Understand that this is really informal. We don't have a script. We sometimes have an idea of what we want to talk about. And I don't know if that's necessarily the case for today's episode, but you may pull a little bit of something that speaks to you and helps you in your journey as a leader.
Yes. No, I'm kidding.
Go ahead. Yeah, we're done. Thank you very much.
Done.
So we also want to invite you to give us your insights or inputs. Engage with us either in the comment section or through messaging. If you have topics in mind, if you have questions or follow-ups. I know I've gotten some outreach regarding a conversation we had last season about running meetings. So we do have some stuff this year. We're going to talk about operational kind of tips and tricks, things that leaders need to know to be effective and also to look effective to try and facilitate the process of leadership too. So definitely keep those coming.
Yeah. And we've been, Chet, JR, and I have all been busy post NAMSP with our lives. And I know JR has been texting us with the interesting case he just had where he is now the god of his emergency department, or a rising god. But it had to do with leadership, I assume.
Somewhat, yeah. Famous, no. Infamous, notorious, maybe. That's
the trauma surgeons are possibly a little irked by you. I don't know.
I didn't seem mad. I didn't seem angry.
What happened?
Yeah, I had a case where it was a traumatic cardiac arrest, a very unfortunate motorcycle accident. I was very badly injured, and while en route to the emergency department, which was a short transport, he went into cardiac arrest. And in a traumatic cardiac arrest, most traumatic arrests are not survivable. They're injuries that you cannot be fixed no matter what kind of medical care you've got. But there is a fairly aggressive procedure that you can perform to address the potentially reversible causes. It's a bit of a Hail Mary. The survival rate is extremely low, but it's called a thoracotomy, and specifically in this case, a clamshell thoracotomy, which entails opening the chest and getting the heart out of the pericardium to repair any wounds in there, stopping bleeding inside of the chest, clamping the aorta to divert blood flow from the lower part of the body to keep it up here for the heart and for the brain, which are the most blood flow and oxygen sensitive tissues in the body, and do internal cardiac compressions. Take the heart and squeeze it between your hands and try to get blood moving. So the patient showed up with very little warning to us. Now, usually when this procedure is performed in a trauma center, you have trauma surgeons that are there that are typically the ones that are initiating it or doing it. Sometimes it has to be initiated by an emergency physician. Our trauma service is outstanding. They're super responsive. They're great at what they do. And this guy, though, he showed up like in arrest within a couple minutes of our notification. And seeing that if you don't initiate this procedure within 5 minutes of the loss of pulses, then it is a futile procedure. This was that one case where maybe we can fix it. I went ahead and initiated the procedure, cut across his chest, and then opened his rib cage with a pair of trauma shears and exposed the heart and the lungs. And by this point, the trauma resident was there with me, and she was in there, hands on the chest, doing internal CPR as I'm clamping the aorta. And it was a fairly, again, Hail Mary kind of heroic attempt at saving the guy's life. We did get a pulse back on him and did make it to the operating room, but unfortunately died of what we determined to be not survivable injuries. And afterwards, it's funny, you do something like that, and up until that moment, I thought, the hardest part of doing the procedure is picking up the scalpel. It's not a technically difficult procedure. It's one that I've practiced many times. It's one that I've done both in the field and in the hospital several times, and it's big medicine, though, to do it. And in thinking, the hardest part is picking up the scalpel. And then I reviewed Dr. John Hines, his lecture, Crack the Chest, Get Crucified. And he says, if you think that's the hard part, then you don't know the procedure well enough. And I thought to myself that, that's right. I've made a deliberate study of this and other really important procedures. Certainly there are procedures that will draw scrutiny once they're performed, whether that's a surgical airway or a resuscitative hysterotomy or amputation. So I've studied these things, practiced them, and run mental models of when would I do them, when would be the right circumstance, to make sure that I'm doing it at the right time, that my intentions are honorable with it. And so that's what I realized is the hardest part. It's not picking up the scalpel to make the decision. It's the preparation. It's the maintaining the mindset to do something like that. It's the practice and banishing fear through the practice of the procedure so that the procedure itself is not scary. And that's the hard part. And so I had conflicting feelings when the trauma director reached out to me and said, hey, I want to sit down and talk about this case with you. And it wasn't in any sort of confrontational way. It was just, obviously this is a rare thing and we want to look at it and see what we can do better. And here's the video, because all of our resuscitations are recorded. And so it took me a couple of days before I was able to watch the video. I was really worried, like, man, how did I perform? And was I spinning my wheels? Was I being a good leader? Was I being a good example to the others that were in the trauma bay? And because I wasn't the only physician there. When I was in there, this was, of course, the night before conference, and so there were no ER residents in there. One of the other attendings, Allison Smith, she got the airway, which was a feat in and of itself. Eye gel's in place, and there's a lot of vomit in the airway, so she effectively did a blind video intubation into a pool of vomit and nailed it on the first shot. Absolute hero stuff. It was awesome. And Chris Reba was kind of running the resuscitation pieces of that as well, so it was a really terrific team. And I had my own perspectives, but I was very head down in the procedure, so I'm not like really watching the whole room as I'm doing it, and I'm not having situational awareness of everything else, which is another point of when leading, you can do the procedure or you can run the room, but you can't do both. And handing off the stick to somebody else for running it, which worked really well here. When I finally got around to watching the video, I was happy with what I saw. That's not to say I liked everything that I did, like everything that happened in there, but overall, I remained calm, quiet, very goal-directed, and communicated really clearly. So in that, I'm looking holistically at the room, but I'm really trying to appraise and assess my own performance in that. And just like an athlete, you go to the tape and watch what you did and see, or what can I do differently? Sometimes I go to the tape by watching other people in these situations. So by precepting residents and medics in actual calls or in simulations and providing some feedback to them. That is also the practice. That's deliberate practice on my part as well for how to act in those situations. At the end of the day, it was, of course, a tragic and very unfortunate case, but I was happy how the team performed. I was happy about my role in it and what I did. But the other piece of this was that I hadn't really expected was that the rest of the shift, I could not get organized. I was like walking around the emergency department, like going here, oh, I need to do this, oh, I need to do that. I couldn't focus. And that was even worse the next day. And I was at home and I had a couple things to do at home. I didn't have to go to work, but I could not focus. I was pacing between the bedroom, the bathroom, and the kitchen, and getting my coffee and doing this. And I was just wired, having not had a whole lot of sleep too. But I'm like, okay, this is going to be a down day. This is going to be a me day. And I hadn't really recognized that before when I've been involved in these kinds of cases, because I've had several cases like this. I was like, oh, okay. And now I need to develop some sort of skill that involves how do I recenter after that? How do I pick up the pieces after that? Whether it's a success or a failure or anything, just a fairly intense experience. Yeah, I have to develop some sort of way to unwind.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, JR. I think that's such a valuable kind of, if I were putting quotations, case study of leadership. But I think it gives a lot of good insight into the pressures of, I would say, leadership or just being in that situation. And I'm going to pull a thread a little bit in the very beginning here, because I think it's important, and I think it's something that's important because I have very young kids, a 6-year-old and a 4 going on 5-year-old. And it really does put a lot of things in perspective. And I have my kids come up to me and they're like, oh yeah, I was really scared to do this. And we always, what my wife and I do is, yeah, it's okay to be scared, but that's okay because you still did it. And that's called being brave. And no one talks about how you feel when you're brave is you feel scared shitless. And that's like the epitome of rage. So I guess the question I would have for you, JR, is in that moment when you picked up the scalpel or had to make that decision, how did you feel? What was the emotional gestalt of going through your head or your, I know as we're all emergency physicians here, we're all getting to that mode, but at the same time, to make that decision to, we're going to do this. Yeah. How did you feel?
I fortunately I'd had a minute before arrival to think about like the what ifs. And this is an exercise that I do a lot with myself. I do this with residents of what if. And so I had certain triggers in my mind of if this, then that. And I think that developing those triggers is so important as a performer, but also as a leader, to have mental walkthroughs of if this happens, what then? And I talk about this with airway management, with the development of a PACE plan, which is a primary, alternate, contingency, emergency. So you have 4 layers deep of your airway plan. And so primary, video laryngoscope, alternate, direct laryngoscopy, contingency, iGel, emergency, surgical airway. And having that in my mind, so then if a initial airway attempt is unsuccessful, then can move to the next step in the plan without a whole lot of time to think about it because you've already made the decision. And I think having that PACE plan in your mind, and not just in some sort of nebulous ethereal, I'll crack the chest or I'll do the surgical airway, but actually having the equipment at hand, knowing where it is and having it ready so that you're not like looking through your bag or looking on the shelf for the kit, whatever that is. And practice banishes fear. That's a big thing. If you practice it enough, then the technical performance is not as frightening to you. And I felt I had practiced it enough to understand the procedure well enough to perform it. Now, I'm not a trauma surgeon. I cannot do what those people do. Of course, they've got so much experience with that, and that's going to be expert performance. But can I do it well enough for the timing to do the timing right here? If you wait for a lot of these things until you're absolutely sure that it needs to be done, then your opportunity to save their life has probably passed you by. And it's like the surgical airway. A lot of folks you can't intubate, can't ventilate. And so they keep spinning their wheels to try to intubate, and then the patient codes. And it's like, now I can do the surgical airway, but man, like the patient, we should have done this 5 minutes ago and we may not have lost the patient at that point. So I think at the moment it was like, oh, I guess here we go, we're in it. But it was at that point just focused on the technical procedure itself because the decision was made. So I didn't have a lot of conflict in my mind. But I will say that my previous experience with this procedure has been as far as the fallout, the aftermath has been mixed. And I've had some very strongly negative post-procedure experiences where I did one on a stabbed patient that we were transporting to the hospital. I initiated the thoracotomy in the field and did get a pulse back, did get ROSC, and ultimately he died. But I was invited to trauma conference and to talk about the case. But once there, I realized they had no intention for me to talk about the case. They just wanted to rail at me and look cool in front of the surgeons and so forth. So it was like, okay, that was a very strongly negative experience, which is, I'm sure, what they intended for it to discourage me from considering that procedure. But I stand by it, what I did at the time there. But like knowing that, oh man, this is going to be a big deal. And I can only imagine a resident having to make that call, a surgery resident having to crack a chest without the attending. And man, what if this goes wrong, or if this is determined to be the wrong choice, about how miserable their life would be after that. So that was in my mind at some point. This is going to hurt later. That I felt that at the time. I felt that afterwards too. Okay, here we go. And wake up in the morning and there's 50 text messages on my phone from people. And I was a little bit trepidatious about that, knowing that I knew my intentions were honorable. I knew the procedure was indicated. I knew that I knew how to do it, and it was within my scope of practice. But the feeling of the fallout was something I was really not expecting to enjoy.
A very professional way to put it.
There's a lot to unpack in the story, but also in the surrounding issues, JR. One of the biggest ones is that I think because of the easy access to video and web-based documentation and all, I think people don't realize that even just making that decision and then taking that action, this was not arbitrary. There was a career's worth of professional judgment, intense preparation, reflection, and effort that went into, not to mention the moral accountability and responsibility you feel to treat and care for suffering humanity, right? All of that led up to the decision. I think people don't realize that sometimes. This was an intensely professional and a very intimate thing you did for a human being that was dying. It was a fellow human, and you intervened in probably one of the most extreme ways, right? So I think sometimes I don't know if we're desensitized as a culture just because of access to this sort of stuff or what it is, but there's so much more inside that. And then even for our non-medical listeners, there are incredible leadership lessons in this story. I think just an example, for example, would be the fact that one of the things that marks this is intensely professional. And if you ask the average, say, sports fan, what's the difference between a pro and not? They'll say, oh, they get paid for it. And I'm like, no, man, the salary is not the thing that determines professionalism. There's this whole self-regulation, setting a standard for ourselves, so many other things, right? So your preparation up to that point was, I think, a defining part of your professionalism. Everything you did, whether it was procedural knowledge, playing the what-if game, having the equipment ready, I think one of the biggest differences between professionals and novices is novices hope to get it right. Professionals prepare and train to the point where they cannot get it wrong, right? That doesn't mean mistakes don't happen, but there's a level of preparation there that I think often goes unnoticed. And I think the actual cut is probably the tip of the iceberg, really important tip of the iceberg. But I think the intense effort and commitment that you were showing before you even did the procedure is often lost because that's backstage and people don't see that.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback on your metaphor, Chet, that this is truly, the tip of the iceberg. All your decades of emergency medicine experience, training led up to that. And sure, I know as a fellow physician, you're picking apart every little second in your head, which is why you were so jazzed up probably afterwards and days afterwards and everything. And you made it look easy, and it's not lucky. It's based on all your training. And I would say it reminds me of the story I just read, and you guys are military, so you're like, oh, you guys didn't know about this? but it had to do with Admiral Nimitz. He was the Navy admiral in charge of the whole Midway assault, one of the most pivotal naval battles in World War II. And Japan was there, and they had cracked the Japanese code, but still there were a lot of variables that led him to have a lot of self-doubt and said, are we going to do this or not, are we not going to do this? And it reminded me of when he talked to his mentor, and his mentor's Admiral Nimitz, when you're in command, command. And that's basically it, right? We can pick apart it now. Oh, I felt a little hesitant. I had this previous experience where I had a negative. I was the whipping boy for all the trauma surgeons in the trauma team. And I still stand by my experience. And that experience reinforced your experience here. And I think you did the phenomenal thing of, sure, you could have had the self-doubt where you talked about airway people hesitating to do the crike when they should have just jumped and done the crike. You had done all that training, all that mental exercising. And then you said, when it came time to command, you commanded. And I think that in itself is a flag in awesome leadership there.
There's a contemporary kind of movie scene that plays over and over again. If you've seen Top Gun Maverick,
yeah, we
repeatedly hear them say, don't think, just do. And my biggest concern watching that was, we're going to have a bunch of novices, not necessarily imbeciles, but people who have never put the time in to actually ever think, that are just going to walk around going, don't think, just do. So in JR's case, he could just do because he had spent decades thinking about this and preparing for it. So that ability to just do comes from a ton of backstage preparation and leaving nothing to chance. The PACE plan is so brilliant, the primary alternate contingency emergency. And yet it's also very foundational. My military medics had PACE plans. Now, it just so happened that was part of our training for them. We expected them to have that. We asked them to tell us about it before it happened. And then we do this with our residents. But JR, other parts of this, and Phil, that Nimitz story is so perfect for this because an accountable person is going to feel nervous, even if they are fully prepared, right? So at some point, we just have to execute and just go ahead and initiate the action that we know is right. But JR, the other thing was the after procedure kind of experience that you had, the professional reflection, which is in special operations, we often call it performance critique, where we go back deliberately and walk through it like every minute of an operation and go, what happened? You did this, I did that, you did that. Why? How did it work? What could have been better? Blah, blah, blah. And then we dissect it all the way down to the outcome. And it's not finger pointing. It's really an unemotional and deliberate way of looking at what could have been done better and what was done well. So we'll repeat that. And then there's the other part, right? It's not nearly so unemotional or scientific. You felt it at a kind of physiologic level. You had done something extreme. It was done professionally, but man, the body still makes you live with that for a while. And I think there are some things we can talk about, I guess, behaviors or activities we can do not to avoid that after effect, but to get it back under control. And Phil knows one of these. It's box breathing or 4-7-8 breathing. These are highly effective and proven techniques we can use even in the moment.
I think for me, the next day when I think I slept for 3 hours and then woke up. And so, I was, as I realized I was spinning my wheels for the first couple of hours of the day, I recognized, okay, this is just going to be a me day. And that I am not going to expect anything of myself. I'm not going to expect to get anything done. And then I'm also thinking, hey, okay, what about my next shift? The next time I go into work, and which I did the following day, and that was fine. I could back to normal, and that's it. But using the movie reference that you just quoted there, Chet, with Top Gun Maverick, to me, the pivotal moment for this procedure was similar to in that scene that you're talking about when they're flying in, they're getting ready to make the run, and the admiral puts it on Maverick to say, all right, it's your call, and you do it, and he goes, dagger attack. So that moment, that was we're doing this, and we're fully committed to doing it now. And Mike Loria talks about this with some of his stuff that he's written and broadcast on mindset for these kinds of situations. And the Steve Rush, the beat the stress fool. You breathe, talk, see, and focus. breathing, like the box breathing or Ayurvedic breathing, whatever that technique is, getting control of that breath, doing positive self-talk, things like you can do this, and seeing it, visualizing the procedure. When you talk about Michael Phelps, who's one of the most decorated Olympic swimmers in history and phenomenal athlete, would visualize the entire race from being on the platform to entering the water, each stroke, the turnaround, visualize, mentally walked through the entire race. So visualizing that. And then the last thing being a focus word, some kind of verbal cue to yourself that says, all right, it's go time. And when I'm doing an intubation, a rapid sequence intubation, for me, that focus phrase or word is push the drugs. And we've prepped it. We've done the timeout. Everybody's got their roles understood. And then, okay, now we are committed to it at this point. At that, even splashing, and if you've ever been in a thoracotomy, like in a military setting, in a combat surgery setting, it's when you hear the doc say splash, then you throw the iodine over the chest and get out of the way. And so, like for me, I grabbed the iodine and how long has he been in arrest? And they're like, just a couple minutes, he arrested me. Okay, just turned and splashed. And like, all right, now at that point, that was the decision point that like, all right, I am committed to this and I'm committed to see this procedure through. And I think recognition of that crossing the Rubicon moment, and that I think is helpful in any leadership position. The metaphor of crossing the Rubicon, the Roman army, once they crossed that Rubicon River, then that meant that that was that point of no return. We're leaving Rome, we're going to wherever this is, and we're going to see this through. And so recognizing that moment and then committing yourself to it and your team to it and going from there. It's not to say you can't adjust fire. You absolutely have to be somewhat flexible in that and be willing to do that. But at the same time, like doing each step after that point in half measures is probably not going to do you or the people you are serving any good.
And I think the run up to all of that is as important, or maybe even more important, right? If your equipment had not been ready, then it didn't matter when you crossed the Rubicon, you would have been unprepared, right? So not only was the commitment, the ability to decide to stay committed to it, those were huge, but the quiet discipline, the preparation, the ensuring ahead of time that all the pieces that you needed were in play, those are the invisible parts that I think novice leaders sometimes miss, or that people who are still either learning how to lead or maybe don't know how to lead sometimes miss, because what they see is you standing there with the flag waving after restoring vital signs, but what they don't see is the boring, unsexy, ensuring that the trauma kit was ready, right?
Yeah.
One of my things that I'll teach sometimes, there's 3 things I always say, and one of them is control what you can, but accept everything, right? So you have to accept the nature of the circumstances, whether you love them or not. And then you do have to take control of the parts of it that are under your control, which also means the time leading up to it.
Marcus Aurelius, amor fati, love your fate. Control what you can and
right.
just love the fire that you're in. I'd like to pull the string on kind of the after effects. I think that's a fascinating part about your story, JR, about how you said you couldn't focus after that patient, but then also a couple of days. And if you're willing to share a little more detail, that'd be great. But first, I guess for our audience here, Chet, could you explain or define box breathing or 3-5-7 kind of breathing kind of thing you were talking about?
Yeah, it's very interesting that many of us may believe that our physiologic response, our rapid heart rate, our sense of anxiety or feeling amped up, many of us feel that those are out of our control and there's nothing we can do about that. And in a way, that's true. We're all human and we are going to have a human response. On the other hand, surprisingly, there are things we can do. Nobody's going to be able to sit down and say to their heart, slow down and make it slow down. But there's great science demonstrating that if you can control and regulate your breathing in a systematic way, that you can measurably and reproducibly bring down your heart rate. And in the studies that have done this, that people actually are able to bring down their blood pressure and get everything under control. And it even affects neurotransmitter levels. So it's not a do it for the first time in crisis kind of skill. It's actually a practiced skill. What I will do is do one or more of these breathing techniques at least once a day. And that way, if I need it in the moment, I can do it. So let's talk about the breathing technique. So breathing the box is something that martial artists use, snipers use, a variety of people who work in high intensity professions that require a steady mind and a steady hand have experience with this. And the box is simply a mental construct. So you inhale for 4 seconds, then you hold your breath for 4 seconds, then you exhale for 4 seconds, and then you hold that empty breath for 4 seconds. So if you do one of these cycles, it's good. If you do 4 or 5 or 6 of these cycles, there's an immediate and measurable reduction in heart rate, decrease in blood pressure, a sense of control. Like any physical skill, it requires practice. So the very first time we do it might be like the first time we ever tried to walk. We're probably not going to do. It might be like the first time we tried to ride a bike. Wasn't very coordinated, didn't get very far. But with sustained attention to it, we can learn. And then the other is like a 3-7-8 or a 4-7-8 breathing. And that's really just inhale, hold, exhale that many seconds. And the key is to practice this. And it goes back to the JR thing. Or you've done it too, Phil. You're a triathlete. Nobody does more preparation before the day, right? The race is won during your training breaks. It's not necessarily won on the day of the race. And this is the same. We just got to put in a little bit of time, make the investment, and then later reap the reward.
Yeah, and audience, this just happened at NAMSP. Chet introduced me to the 478 because I saw him the second day of NAMSP, and I was like, man, I'm exhausted. I had just bad sleep. My mind was racing because when you're at NAMSP, there's a lot going on, and you have a lot of things that are tasks that is on your task list kind of thing. And I was like, Chet, man, I'm tired today. Worn down because I couldn't sleep. And Chet gave me this advice about the 4-7-8 breathing at night when he has difficulty sleeping. So I do that now when I get my bouts of insomnia when I'm just like wide awake at like 2 a.m. I'm like, oh, get to sleep, Phil, get to sleep. That doesn't help out when you talk yourself and try to force yourself to sleep. But I thought that was an invaluable tool to practice and to use when you're getting amped up like that. Thanks for that.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that worked. And I'll tell you, I think a lot of times we're going to feel what we feel, and there's no sense in denying it. In fact, the sooner we accept, I'm feeling this, the better off we are. What we don't have to do is stay immersed in it or be a victim of it, right? We can accept the condition for what it is, and then we do have tools. Sometimes the tools are breathing skills. Sometimes it's some sort of activity or meditation we can do. Sometimes it's speaking with a peer or colleague or a professional. If you have an experience and then it's intrusive and you really can't get by it, ultimately we may need to sit down with somebody and have a conversation with a professional counselor or something like that. And these are all tools in our toolkit. So everything we have from kind of personal level intervention and reset activity all the way up to professional counseling might be useful. And honestly, all of those are fair game and are in play to keep ourselves intact, to come back and lead another day, right?
Yeah. And I think back to JR's story, what I love that you did, JR, was you had the insight and you explicitly said to yourself, okay, this is going to be a me day. You knew that you just weren't in it. So if you're willing to share with us, and feel free to say, no, I don't want to. This is a recurrent thing, especially in our profession of emergency medicine, right? Well, this is going to happen again. When you recognize this, what do you do personally to get through that kind of area where you're unfocused, you're just either energized or just not quite yourself after a scenario like that?
For me, lowering my expectations of myself, and I don't mean professionally. Knowing I've always got a list of things that to do and stuff to do around the house and more projects I want to work on and that sort of thing, and recognizing like, hey, it's not going to get done today, and that's okay, and I can just take some time, go to the gym, take a walk, and just just relax and put my feet up. And my wife is so good about encouraging me to do that. She's why don't you just relax today? And she's really good at validating that. And it's okay. And I know it's a me day, not a me year. It doesn't mean I'm a lazy piece of shit, right? I'm just taking a day to recover and relax. And I've been in a lot of high stress situations. I've been in mass casualties. I've been in active shooters. So a lot of these feelings that happen are not unfamiliar to me. And looking back on a lot of these high consequence events, the ones that you feel they fade pretty quickly from memory. You remember them, but you don't live in them. They don't visit you when you close your eyes. The ones that you don't feel went well, they keep coming back. And there was an incident I was involved with in 2009 that still keeps coming back. And you're trying to recognize, like, and again, doing the professional examination, that dispassionate sort of hot wash with myself. I have re-examined that incident more times than I could possibly count and come to peace with, here's what I could do better. This is what I wish I'd done differently. This is where I think I went well. And that, but it's still a hard time with it. So it still pops up. And so, yeah, doing a little bit of seeking some professional help. And it's funny because I didn't seek professional help around that incident. And it's just years later. And as I'm talking to the therapist and doing the EMDR and this came up. And so it's, oh yeah, okay, that's still living with me. And I think there's a couple of things to banish some of those. One is honestly, being able to see the video of this was really helpful ultimately, even though I put it off for a couple of days. I'm like, man, I'm not sure I want to see it. And so I did, but I was able to objectively look at it through the lens of video and say, oh, okay, I didn't do as bad as I thought I did. And I can give myself a little grace for this and pull some lessons learned from it. So that was helpful. Hot washing with the crew. So we do have a habit in my emergency department that after a resuscitation that we get all the staff together for a hot wash for a few minutes after we've cleaned the room up and we've gotten everything back to normal, if you will. Then we'll just all get together and hot wash that real quick in the trauma bay and talk it through. I found that was extremely helpful as well. Examining it is a big part of that, so I can then let it go. So I don't have to keep thinking of it through my mind and running it over and over, because you're thinking of it through an emotional perspective, through an emotional lens of the time that you experienced it. And so you being able to do that with video and then really say, step back from it, watch myself in that. So that was helpful. The other is getting back on the horse, getting back to work is really good. And I know other incidents that I don't feel did as well, getting back in and having the chance to prove myself again, having a chance to do another case, which is almost like a do-over, then that helps. And I remember I saw Admiral McRaven give a talk, and just a fascinating talk. And I asked him, can you give me an example of a time that you failed? And because obviously he's a very storied career and being an incredible leader. He gave us a very personal story of when he was relieved of command of a SEAL team, and that going home, man, I'm not sure I'm cut out for this, because it's a big deal in the Navy. It's a big deal in special operations. And talking to his wife, and she said, you've never really backed away from anything. You've never given up on anything in your life. And he said, sure enough, things being what they are, that chance to prove yourself again comes along. And it wasn't very long before it came along, and he was able to get back on the horse, if you will, and prove to himself and others that he is a very capable leader.
That's one of those things in crisis. It's human nature to, after the fact, withdraw, but nobody ever talks about how long to stay withdrawn, or how to get back on. And then sometimes there's a tendency, especially if you look at athletics, to say, forget about that putt, get back and make the next one. Forget about that interception, forget about it. And you don't really want to forget about it, but what you do need to do is move past it, right? So you can't live in that moment over and over again. If you forget about it, probably do it again, right? Now, the reality of it is if you live an active life, one of contributing and leading, for example, then you're going to repeatedly have opportunities to either succeed or fail. Hopefully you're not failing on the same thing over and over again, right? That's the fear everybody has. But the reality of it is we're not going to get it right every time. The key is proper preparation, learning from not only our mistakes, because none of us is going to live long enough to make every mistake and learn from it. The key is to be a student of life and learn from the leaders that have gone before you and everybody around you. And now you're elevating your game. And then having gone through this crisis type of experience, at some point we do have to re-engage, right? Get back in it and get a few more reps in there, restore our confidence. Oh yeah, okay, I can do this. And the example I always use is we overthink these things sometimes. I think we should think it. But if every baby that was learning how to walk thought that it was a catastrophic failure to fall down the first time they fell, oh, I suck, I'm never going to be able to do this, we'd all be crawling around. There'd be nobody walking in the world, right? Because we'd just give up as soon as it happened. But those little babies are teaching a very important lesson, which is get back up and get going. You got this. And you're going to fall again. That's a reality, but you're also going to get back up again. And it is harder than that, but I think that it's possible too. And I think, JR, your mature approach to it. And did I just say JR and mature in the same sentence?
Nobody believes you.
We're cutting that out. We're cutting that out.
This is where the internet comments start stacking up from all of my friends.
And I just lost all credibility. Dang it. But that approach is so key, right? You did the thing. You had done the preparation before the thing. You felt a very human response to it, and then you re-engaged. You're not Superman, but I think that is exactly what we are meant to do in leadership positions. And I think that's part of the magic of it, is within reach for all of us, but we do have to get in there and do it.
Batman Begins, JR. Why do we fall, Bruce? So we can learn to pick ourselves up.
Yeah. Now I have to figure out the difference between getting back on the horse and and dopamine stacking. Because that was my instinct to critical incidents I've been involved before. Like, all right, cool, let's go to the next one. Or all right, I'm going to go home, and then I'm going to come back and we're going to do this trauma call again, chasing that as well. I think that's something to be cautious of. There's a guy who gave a really good talk at NTOA. I was a police officer that was drug task force and who got very badly wounded. And he was talking about the decisions leading up to that incident, which he said was just a tactical error on his part. And why? Because he's going out, he's kicking doors and taking down bad guys and doing it again and again, and just kept chasing that experience. And so then one time it bit him really badly. And so like when you have that high and then that low feels really low, and then you have another big high and another big low, and in between, and then you start trying to raise those lows. And this is why folks that tend to be in these roles of emergency medicine and first responders, combat vets, and so forth, that's why you start engaging in risky behaviors like alcohol use, substance abuse, really risky sexual relationships, all these kinds of things, to try to boost that dopamine in those lows in between those highs there. And my highs are not as frequent as they in roles, but recognizing between in between sort of sucks. Oh God, I feel that, and it's all chemicals. It's all brain chemicals and stuff that you're dealing with. So recognize that too. That it's okay to feel weird the next day.
Yeah. Great. Well, on that note, should we take it to our next segment, or what do you guys want to do now? We're 50 minutes in. We don't want to make this too long. Although, I'm sorry, JR. This probably was a little more personal than you were expecting. And I apologize. I didn't intend for this whole episode to go that way.
I feel like Michael Clark Duncan and Armageddon. He goes, "Craig, I just got a hug for you."
They got a lot going on.
Yeah.
Eating Fight Club right now.
Well, really? Oh,
because I've seen the movie. I love the movie, but I'm like, I want to read the book and everything. Yeah. The book is, the movie is very faithful to the book, and it is very enlightening. And it's also, it's still pertinent today with the the issues with masculinity and the bro culture and everything, but it has that subtle delve into why we're having these issues, especially in the masculine world today. So it's surprising how pertinent it is. But I would say the other book I'm reading right now is, speaking of General McCraven, JR, is The Wisdom of the Bullfrog. It's a short book, but it's about leadership. And it's actually, for our audience members, General McCraven gave that wonderful UT Austin graduation speech about make your bed. That's probably the number one thing you should do every day is make your bed, right? And he just phrases things so well that it just clicks with me. So that's another book that I'm reading that I really like and enjoying right now.
Well, that's very cool. And by the way, not to be too picky, but Admiral McCraven, he'll probably come punch us in the arm if we call him General. But
Admiral, sorry, sir.
That's okay. For civilians, they are all the same rank.
He knows not what he does.
They're all called flag officers or general officers. So the Navy calls them admirals, the Marine Corps, Air Force, and Army all call them general. But I'll tell you, another book that had a movie based on it that has a very different outcome is First Blood. If you have not read that book, the movie First Blood always resonated with me. I'm a fan of the way Sylvester Stallone portrayed Rocky, the way he portrays John Rambo, at least in the first movie. I'm not a huge fan necessarily of what follows, but interestingly, since my service in the Air Force ended, or honestly after everything was fine until like my third deployment, and then I started carrying some baggage with me, and there's the very end scene of First Blood. If you haven't seen it, Rambo's holed up in the sheriff station there, or in the office. He's gone off the rails. The whole town is now, the gas station's on fire, and the ammo shop and gun shop has been torched, and it's on fire, and ammo's cooking off everywhere. And Troutman comes in and goes, "Look, man, it's over. All right, enough." And Rambo loses it, right? So what was interesting to me is, first of all, the very end of the book is very different from the very end of the movie. Huh. So spoiler alert, in the book, Rambo is a complete lost cause, and it's not Colonel Troutman, it's a captain, much lower in rank, more of a company level leader, and he shoots Rambo, and that's how the book ends. Rambo's dead because he's just too far gone and he's lost it.
He's also murdered some innocent people in the book too. So
yeah, like absolutely,
absolutely.
Yeah, he doesn't get executed, but he's still at war. He's treating this town like it's at war, and Troutman kills him. So when I read that, I was just crushed because I'd never read the book, but I'd seen the movie. I went back and looked through some veterans groups that were involved in the original screenplay creation, and Stallone wanted the movie ending that actually came out. The producers wanted the book ending, and they fought about it. They actually had to stop production for a while. And when they initially rolled it out, they actually played the book ending in some theaters and the movie ending, the current movie ending, in other theaters, and were there to observe audience reaction. And when they played the book ending, people had a vocal and negative reaction, shouting at the screen, "You don't just do that, it's not his fault," that kind of thing. And when they played the one Stallone was advocating for, there was a huge response, especially on behalf of the veterans. They're like, in 4 minutes, this quiet guy said all the stuff that's bothering us. He identified our issues. We don't belong anymore. We don't fit in. But anyway, as far as books go, now that I've spoiled the ending, do check out First Blood. It's interesting. I'm always interested in what movies are based on. In terms of nonfiction books, I just picked up a book called Range, how generalists are poised to succeed in a world full of specialists. So stay tuned. I'll tell you more about that once I get into it.
Great book. I love that book. And in regards to your First Blood, I remember watching it as a kid. I was like, oh, what a cool movie. Stallone in the jungles of Seattle, Washington, killing people. That's awesome. But then when you watch it as an adult, you're like, holy shit, this is all about PTSD and dealing with that. And I was like, wow. And I thought the acting, especially at the end with Stallone breaking down, I was like, this is a phenomenal movie. And I had no idea that other aspect that you talked about, Chet. So what an interesting story there.
Some of the backstory that is not as clear in the movie is the character of the sheriff, who and why he has such contempt for John Rambo is that he himself was a Korean War vet, and there's that feeling of being forgotten, and that like all the attention's on Vietnam and everything there, and where he too had served honorably and was kind of left behind there. And I thought that was good. That did really put a different light on, oh, okay, like I can see where there's some resentment coming back here. But I appreciate that they did the ending they did in the movie rather than the book, because I think there is such a bias toward veterans by a lot of folks who've not been in. And everybody's yellow ribbons, thank you for your service, all that kind of stuff. But there's also a very definite, like, you look at somebody who is a combat veteran, is this somebody who's like all traumatized and about to snap and do something terrible? And I think that if they had done the movie the way that they did in the book, that's the image that would have been portrayed. And I think that would have reinforced some of those biases and prejudices that folks have towards us as vets. And I would not have appreciated that at all. So I think what they did with the movie was it did treat a lot of these issues with nuance, and I enjoyed that. But when I read about Dennehy's character, and he's feeling kind of left behind here, and with our recent conflicts here, I'm an Iraq veteran, and we've got Iraq, which came to an end, and then more or less for us, not for the Iraqis, unfortunately, but that came to an end. But Afghanistan just went on, and there was so much focus on that. In fact, even my second tour in Iraq, I was feeling that, because Iraq's kind of drawn down. It's not getting the attention. And there was that feeling of that, hey, we're still over here, man. We're still doing this thing. So I could feel a little bit of how Dennehy's character felt in that moment.
Yeah. Just real quick, I felt that way in the spring of 2003 before Iraq was kicking off, because we were sitting out on the Pakistani border and we kept hearing news reports of everything's fine. We're going to be able to do this in Iraq and maintain 2 theaters. And we're sitting there looking at each other going, we're having a hard time getting resupplied. We cannot get the even medical equipment that we need. How is it that we think we are okay in both places when our boots on the ground experience is so different? So anyway, the perspectives that, and I'll tell you the other thing just real quick. Sorry, JR, I know we were moving there, but I think if a good thing came out of that, I often say nothing good comes out of war. And then I add that unless it's medical innovation, right, that happens. We do get better at some of the trauma care. I think the other thing is depending on your perspective, a sense of compassion and attention to your fellow human being. Like to this day, I can't stand watching somebody eat alone without company, because we would be sitting there at Thanksgiving or Christmas in a tent somewhere. You get all these American and coalition folks eating together, and one guy would be sitting alone at a table on Thanksgiving. And I'm like, what the heck? So we would go and sit there, and okay, if they want to sit by themselves, that's different, but nobody should really feel that isolated. And not only in a combat zone, but really back at home also, right? That awareness of people, hopefully those are the kind of things that we can harvest out of the negative experience of war. Anyway, I'm back. We can finish talking about the books and
whatever
movies.
book you're reading, JR.
Let's have it.
So right now I'm reading a book called Less Than 1%. And I think actually one of you might have recommended that to me. And it's about these outliers with performers, that how do we predict the folks who are really going to be the stellar performers, those star performers? And they talk a lot about how folks got it wrong, how Tom Brady, Steph Curry, like these incredible world-class athletes, among the best who have ever played their respective games. And even business leaders, you when you say it helps to be educated, helps to be smart, but at the same time, when you look at the CEOs of Amazon and Meta and Tesla, and you look at these folks like they dropped out of college or didn't go to college, and so defy those assumptions that we have about what leads to success. And I don't have any real conclusions to bring just yet. I'm only about halfway through the books, but it is interesting, and thinking about them, and how do we, when we look at somebody and like, are you gonna be a good resident? Are you gonna, like, how do we find those predictors? So that's what I'm in.
Great.
Interesting.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for listening to this episode, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Thank you.